hello to everybody. So, Greg, as you're the founder of the charity, do you want to say a quick hi?
Yep. I'll just unmute myself. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see some very established members of Smart School Councils, but also some very new members too. So Ash with the very tidy hair, he joined earlier this week. And then we've got members like Lorrie and Charis who've been members for a while. And it's really nice, I guess, to see that blend, but also just to see anyone, basically. It's been an interesting few months for us, and to be in a situation where we're supporting you in a different way feels really good. So thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Greg. Greg and I went out for a socially distanced lunch walk earlier, and it was the first time he's left the house in 38 hours. So I think he's just pleased to see any human beings at all. So great. Thanks, Greg. So guys, if you can see my screen, what we're going to do today is obviously you're welcome to our CPD on running a Smart School Council at Teachers' Perspective. And we've got teachers, two expert teachers, one from a primary school and one from a secondary school, who are going to talk about their experience running their Smart School Council. So this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to explain to you how you can interact and how you can join in with questions and comments. And then we're going to take each part of the Smart School Council model, the class meetings, the action teams, and the communications team. And then we're going to ask a series of questions about each one. And that's how we'll broach the structure. Expert teacher is going to share some top tips with us about their number one tip, I guess, for running a Smart School Council. And then hopefully towards the end, we'll have some time for some questions. So how do you participate? This is what you guys can get involved. So as you already are, make sure your audio is muted. Really appreciate that. Greg has just welcomed you all in the comments, and that's where we want you to respond to us, if that's okay. So share any thoughts you've got or any questions you've got for our expert teachers in the comments. Greg is going to be overseeing those, and we'll bring them up if we need them and when we need them. If you feel like you've got a question that's really pertinent to what's being discussed, you can also raise your hand virtually or physically, and that's going to be our sort of way of recognizing you've got a contribution that really needs to be addressed at that point. Don't feel like you have to have your camera on, that's absolutely fine. But as Greg said, he does like to see people's faces, so do consider that. So just a test to make sure everybody knows the comment function and know how to find it. Can you just send us a comment to let us know what school you're from and have you been teaching this week? So yeah, I'll give you a couple of seconds just to send in a comment and tell us, have you actually been teaching face-to-face with children, the thing we've all trying to do but have forgotten how to do probably this week, and how have you been getting on? And whilst we're waiting for those to come in, Lorrie, do you want to tell us how you got on this week in school?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Lorrie. I was in with key worker children this week, so an age range from reception to year 5 I had on Monday, which is always interesting. So I wouldn't call it teaching necessarily, more just keeping them busy and finding activities that can hit all of those different age ranges. And I actually had permission to use the computer suite, which the caretaker wasn't happy about, because obviously it now means it needs completely cleaning, but I thought it'd be nice to give them something else to do. But I had to put a post-it on every computer that a child touched, and set of headphones and mouse, and that was interesting, but at least they got to use something different.
That sounds like it's quite tricky to manage that with if you can't allow multiple people to use the same surface on a computer suite particularly.
Yeah, well, we have 30, so we have enough for one each for a class. So I had 9 in, and 5 of them, well, 3 and 2 were from the same family. So it wasn't as tricky because they could be together and near each other. So it wasn't too bad.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lorrie. Well, I can see lots of comments coming in, guys. So it's great that you're all finding the comment box. You know where it is, just in case you've not used Zoom before. A real mix of people sort of have been working, and others that are sort of still working virtually or working from home. I think that is representative, I think, of our little primary and secondary split too. So yeah, cool. Well done, guys. Glad to see your comments in. Greg, anything you want to mention particularly? Any good examples of comments coming in?
Just yeah, loads. We've got we've just got such a big range of things, isn't it? It's difficult to know what's happening, isn't it? So some that have popped in, some that haven't taught, but we're kind of opening next week, and some like Andrew from Valence who's eating biscuits at home, which it sounds really good, to be honest. And yeah, some people like Devinda, hi Devinda, opening next week for year 6 on Tuesday. So that's from some of the teachers we've spoken to this week, it seems that that's what's happening next week. So not much activity this week, but more next week. So yeah, really interesting.
Cool, thanks, Greg. Well, Greg's going to appear every now and again with some comments, so that'll be fun. So thanks, Greg. Right, so who's who then? So you know Greg and I, hopefully, from Smart School Councils, and I'm going to try and facilitate the discussion this afternoon. And then we're also joined by 2 teachers, Lorrie, who you heard from already, from Richard Alibon Primary, and Charis from King's Lynn Academy. So just so that everybody knows who you are, Charis, is it okay if you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about King's Lynn, and tell us about how you got involved in Smart School Councils? Is that okay?
Of course. King's Lynn, for anybody that doesn't know, is, I often describe it as kind of the end of the world. It's the end of the train line in Norfolk. It's quite deprived. I think it's a lovely area. Our school became an academy in 2010 as one of the original failing schools becoming academies. I've been here since just before then, so I've been kind of here through the whole thing. In terms of student voice, started slightly before Smart School Council. I knew they existed, so we were one of those schools, traditional, roll them out. When Ofsted came in, pick a few kids, say the right things, kids, off you pop. Probably never speak to you again until next time. And I was tasked in 2012 kind of setting up something a bit more useful. We're very much about our students in being involved in their learning, since that's what they actually spend all of their time doing, rather than kind of the typical, I don't like the toilets, I don't like the food in the canteen, etc. And then I came across Smart School Council as part of that journey a few years later. I was a trustee for a little while, so quite proud to be part of the development of that. And our main focus as a school, we have quite a good, they're called Student Commission at our school, but quite a good school council. We have a school of 800 students, 850 students, and just over 100 of those are student commissioners. So in terms of buy-in, really high, but actually we wanted something that got everyone involved, and that's where Smart School Council came in. For us, the key feature for us has been the questions, the class meetings, because it means every one of those 850 students is involved every week for us. That's our that's how often we do it. So yeah, like, I love it. So hopefully I can kind of help other people love it.
Thanks, Charis. Like, King's Lynn are an inspiration to Greg and I when it comes to coming up with good questions, because you guys absolutely smash out the questions every week. You've got a particular strength, I think, in your school, don't you, of current affairs questions, or like topical questions that are going on around them, and using those in your class meetings. So yeah, definitely part of the inspiration for our symphony questions have come from you guys. So yeah, we'll talk about commission later on, so let's come back to that. Okay, cool, thanks, Charis. So then, Lorrie, just quick intro from you. How did you get involved in Smart School Council?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lorrie from Richard Alibon Primary School in Barking and Dagenham. I saw Gascoigne and Valence pop up when people were writing, so local schools to me, so some other Barking and Dagenham schools in there. So I became involved with Smart School Council 3 years ago, just coming up for 3 years ago. This is our 3rd year. I'd been running the school council in my school for about 10 years. I've been at my school 20 years, so been there a long time. And our head teacher just wanted something different, something new. It was sort of the old way of running a school council, 2 children from each class, from each year group, met. We had class meetings once every 3 weeks, and then they met to discuss what they'd said. The younger ones never really said anything, and the older ones said too much, perhaps. So he just wanted us to look into new ways of doing it. So the teacher who I was working with at the time saw, I don't know whether it was a leaflet or an advert for Smart School Council, and we attended the training, and then have been running it successfully, we hope, ever since.
Oh yeah, very much so. And I think that, yeah, lots of our members will probably recognize you, Lorrie, from things like the members meetups, or from some of the case study videos. So you have your Smart School Council celebrity status firmly.
My claim to fame.
Yeah, that's it for sure. All right, thanks guys, that's great. So what we're going to do then, now that we know who we're talking to today, is we're going to look at the structure of the Smart School Council's intervention. And we're going to ask both for Charis in the secondary school and for Lorrie in the primary school these 3 questions or 4 questions about each section of the model. So for those of us who need a bit of a refresher, if you can see my screen, you'll see the entirety of our intervention in its 3 composite parts: the class meetings, the communication team, and the action teams. And what we're going to do is ask these questions of each one of those 3 segments. So we're going to ask Charis and Lorrie, how did you set up your class meetings, your communication team, your action team? You get the idea. How do you manage it? What's the hardest part of it? And then what's been your biggest success in each one? And then hopefully, as we take each part of the Smart School Council's intervention, you'll see a real world example of teachers who've got this running and doing it successfully, and maybe know how to overcome some of the barriers for the things that you guys are facing at the moment, or if you're new to the program, that you might face in the future. So that's how this is going to work. So remember to ask questions in the comments as we go along. Raise your hand. Greg's going to be monitoring those, and we'll try and address them as we go. So I think we're going to start, guys, with the communications team. So my predecessor, Asha, who helped Greg set up Smart School Councils, used to refer to the communications team as the minions. They are the young people that help you as a Smart School Council's coordinator to get everybody else involved and take lots of the workload off of you as a teacher in running pupil voice in your school. So really key place for us to start. So let's go to Lorrie first, and I'll come to you, Charis, afterwards. So how did you get on in establishing and setting up your comms team, Lorrie?
So when we first started, like I said, we had the traditional school council, 2 children from each year group. So we sort of had to transition from that and introduce it to the children, because in their eyes, we were sort of now excluding year 1 to 4, because my comms team is only made up of year 5 and 6. So to begin with, we had that transition period where we had to explain to the children that although it wouldn't be a representative from each class on the communication team, they would still be involved in class meetings, which we'll come to later. So I did it that I took the children who were already on the school council from year 5 and 6 to form my communications team. That was in the first year. From then on, we've done it as an application process. So the year 5 children coming up to year 6. So normally at this time of year, but obviously not at the moment, children would apply for the job who wanted to have one of the key roles in the communication team, and then they would be interviewed. That sounds a bit too formal, but they would meet with the current comms team, who would ask and answer any questions. And then if they got the role, and I'll be honest, I try and give everyone a role. I've possibly got a few too many on my comms team, but I give them roles in other parts, sort of action teams, where they can be a lesser part but still feel like they're important. And then they start training with the current communication team, which would be now, if we were there, and ready to take over in the September. So the current year 5s will carry on into year 6 if they want to. I've never had a child not want to carry on, but it is a choice if they want to stop after doing it for a year. And then the new year 5s and any new year 6s that want to join then start in September.
And I think that's key, isn't it, Lorrie? This idea that as you're moving away from a council that represents other people's views, you can be a bit more selective with the pupils you want to be on this leadership group or team, because you want them to have enthusiasm and a degree of skills and resilience to be the ones that you can rely on, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, so we don't, you know, that almost, I'm not saying that's what you're implying, but it sounds like we cherry pick them, which we absolutely don't. So sure. It's children who apply for the job, who want the job, but they have to say on it what they'd be good at. And the great thing about the communication team is there are so many different roles that you need lots of different skills. Children who are good with computers, children who are confident at standing up in front of people, children who are perhaps quieter, less confident, but are really good sort of getting other children involved and doing the paperwork side of it, you know, taking notes in the meetings or writing the newsletter or chasing teachers who forget to do their meeting. So we sort of have a variety of children, and we have, I noticed Charis smiled then, does she have that problem too?
Yeah, do you want to come in, Charis, at this point? Like, how did you get going with this in King's Lynn?
Well, where I was slightly different because we already had student commissions, so we kind of used them as both a little bit of our action team and our communication team. Well, when we come to action team, I'll explain what I mean. But but very similar actually to Lorrie. We get them to apply. Don't know if many people on this chat will remember when we had schools with specialisms. One of our specialisms was enterprise. So back in the day, we designed a application form that's very much like a work application form. So why do you want this role? You know, what skills, like Lorrie said, do you have, etc. And actually the students have to get a reference from one of their teachers just to kind of back them. And then again, similarly, we do an interview. Again, it's the students interviewing students. We don't really get involved. The current commissioners give feedback and they're chosen from that point. And again, we try and put as many on there as we can. I've had to limit it because, as I said before, we're now at 100 and something. So I have to limit it to kind of 20 to 25 kids per year group. But yeah, very similar. It's making sure you get a range of students, they apply, so there's that element of buy-in. It's not just, oh God, okay, our form needs 2 people, who's going to do that? Oh yeah, you're a bit reluctant, but you're one of the only people that kind of I trust to do it or whatever. So you're going to go and you don't really want to do it. The students are bought in if they've applied and bothered with an interview, etc. And they love it. And like Lorrie, you get very few students that then back off from it. So they tend to stay it throughout the school. So
nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So how do you guys find managing it? So after you set it up and the positions are in place and the structure is there and people know what their roles are, like how much effort does it involve? What does it look like to manage the team as you move forward? Let's start with you, Charis, and I'll go to Lorrie after you.
Very little effort once you get it going. If anything, the students bug me to do things if I've forgotten. They're really good at going, hold on a minute, we haven't had a meeting for a while, or actually have you thought about doing this, miss? So actually in terms of managing it, it's the one point in the year we do applications. That takes just a bit of time, and other than that really it's just making sure you meet them kind of regularly enough to make them feel like they are actually part of it and not just a title. But like I say, because it's something the school have had now for quite a long time, in various forms, it's evolved, but they see it as their entitlement for it to exist. And therefore it's the entitlement that it should happen. So they kind of run with it, even if that is actually to come and bug me, quite rightly. So
yeah.
To be fair, not a lot. It doesn't
totally.
take.
Okay, so and you, Lorrie, with running yours, obviously in primary, maybe the independence is something that maybe is slightly different from a secondary context. But yeah, so what's it like managing it on a week-to-week basis?
Yeah, probably slightly different from secondary school because obviously the children are younger. But like I say, it's year 5 and 6 children, so they are the oldest in school. So I meet once a week with them during an assembly time, because obviously finding time to meet with children who might have other roles to do at lunchtime, might not want to meet at lunchtime if it's their day to play football on the playground. So lunchtimes didn't work for us. So they don't go to singing assembly on a Tuesday, and that's when I meet with them, which most of them gleefully skip out of, I've got to be honest.
I mean, being Welsh, I find that deeply offensive because singing assembly is the best. But yeah, okay, fair enough.
And may our singing teacher never have heard me say that. But so we meet on a Tuesday, and we meet in the ICT room, so they have access to computers while we're doing the meeting, so they can. It's hard to explain. I know Greg and Sam, you've seen our meetings, but while they're in the meeting, although it's a meeting for all of them, they're almost all working at the same time on whatever their job is. So although they're listening to each other and meetings sort of being led, but not really by the same child every week, and everyone's sort of interjecting, but so the child that's writing the newsletter will be sitting writing the newsletter as other people are feeding back. The assembly coordinators who prepare the PowerPoint for the weekly assembly will be adding to that as they're getting feedback. The action team developers will be talking about new action teams and whether we're going to approve them or not. And the class meeting tool leaders, whose name I always forget, will be inputting the new week's question into it once the question finder's shared it. So they're all sort of, I'm there to support them, but I tend to not really say very much. But at the beginning, when their first enroll from the September, I have to do quite a lot of scaffolding. So I'll work with each group, you know, this is what you would do if you were running the comms meeting, this is how you might want to set the newsletter out. So initially for primary age, I'd say they probably need about half a term, not so much for mine now because we've been running a couple of years, but in the beginning, you know, a good couple of weeks where I'm scaffolding to each group, this is what you do, this is how you do it, and then I take the step back. And like Charis said, once they've had their training, I pretty much do nothing apart from sit in the corner of the room and answer anything if they need me to, or they might need my authority on the computer to print something off, you know, little stuff like that. But once they're up and running, they're independent. But as primary children, they do need that initial input of how to do it, and they all have their own folder. They all have permission to be in the ICT room at any lunchtime. So the teacher on duty in there knows that if they all wear a communication team badge. So if they're wearing that badge, then they can be in there doing their job on any other day of the week. So they can do it at other times, but Tuesday's the time they get to spend time with me if they need to.
Yeah, thanks, Lorrie. That's really useful. I think that a number of things that I think that are like important to emphasize from Laurie's answer. I think it can't be understated how important having a regular time to meet and a regular place to meet is, and making sure that that's consistent and applied regularly, so that people know they can be held to account for what their jobs are. And then the other thing is knowing what their jobs are and conceptually understanding what's being asked of them. And those, I think, are massive keys to having a good and successful comms team. And as Ben from Gascoigne Primary will tell you, because I think he's here somewhere, Greg and I have done some work recently on helping communications team to understand their roles and learn more about what it is that is expected of them, in which you can have Smart School Council's folders and badges and all those sorts of things. So if you're interested in that, just let Greg and I know and we can help you out with it. Okay, guys, I'm conscious of time, and I know there are 2 more questions with comms teams, but I want to move on to the next section. But the 2 questions I'm not going to ask you about how do you manage, it's like what's the hardest bit about it, and then what's your biggest success. What I will do is get you to write down your answers to that, guys, and then we're going to put it in the Facebook group, if that's okay. So if you want those questions, folks, come along to the Facebook group if you're not already a member, and we're going to post them in there after the CPD. So changing tack a little bit, we're going to go on to class meetings. So Charis, this is when you're going to take center stage, I'm sure. Talk to us about yeah, thanks, Greg. Greg's just put a link in the comments, by the way, folks. If you're not a member of the Facebook group, you should definitely be, because it's where we interact with you most regularly. So those answers will be there soon. Charis, class meetings. How did you get on setting them up?
Really easy. Obviously, like I said, I was a trustee, so I was doing it at a very early stage when Greg and Asha were setting it up initially. So we were doing it on Google Docs then, which was still really easy, but a bit more clunky, I guess. Greg, would you say that was fair? But really easy, really, in terms of setting it up as a thing you use. We've dedicated a day to it every week at form time as part of our pastoral curricula, if you like. So that's been, because I've had senior management really on board with it, that's been really positive. So that was really easy. I would say to any of you, if you can get your senior management on board, you can almost do what you like, because they will see the value of it. So Monday for us is our class meeting day in form time, although that changed this year because there's a rotation. So I make sure it's ready for Monday and teachers do it on their day. We have done it slightly differently. Not all of it is school related. We wanted it as something really regular. So it felt false to ask a school-based question every week for us. So we have now started including world affairs. Like I joked at the beginning, we feel like we're at the end of the world, and often our kids don't see outside King's Lynn, and definitely don't often see past the train line. So they might get as far as Cambridge. They often don't even go to Norwich because that's a bit harder to get to, etc. So their worldview can be quite narrow. So what we wanted to do is talk about things going on in the world that will affect them either directly or indirectly, just to give them a bit of a world view, really. So we've made it that most of the time it's a current affairs question, and then kind of we try at least once half term, but when appropriate, a school-based question. So they're getting their voice in their school as well. So we've asked all sorts of things. We've talked about Brexit. We've talked about drug use. We've talked about all sorts of stuff. And I just think it's important that they get the chance to discuss it, because often, I'm generalising, this is a big generalisation, but they probably don't discuss it at home. So it's a chance for them to discuss it with us and each other. So we found that I have to be really, really honest. I write the question most weeks, but the students are starting to come and say, oh, Miss, if you thought about asking a question about BBC News website on a Sunday is always very useful for starting as a starting point for your question. But yeah, it's been surprisingly easy.
Nice. I think what's really great from your experience is that you've recognised that so the class meeting tool is a vehicle for change, and it can be used to do that in a really effective way, but it can also be used to ask lots of other questions and test students' opinions on a range of subjects. And if you want to use that on a weekly basis, I think that, yeah, it would be impossible to do that and only try to make it about school change, right? And so I think that's an amazing example of the variety of what you can do using the class meeting tools. That's really great, Charis. Thanks for that. So, Lorrie, how did you get on in setting up your class meetings?
Well, I agree. It's really easy to set up in terms of using the tool, because it's basically done for you, and you email it to the teachers, they click on it, and it appears on their screen in class. So in terms of the actual logistics of it, that's really easy to do. We do it once a week. We felt that any less than that, it possibly wouldn't have the same impact and wouldn't become part of the children's routine and the teacher's routine and sort of part of the ethos of the school. So we felt weekly was really important to make it impact student voice, rather than just being something we did, you know, once a month or once every half term. Although in terms of the questions, I totally agree. That was one of our hardest parts at the beginning, was finding the questions that were relevant to the children, because we do it with year 1 to year 6. So finding a question that was relevant and understandable for that age range was quite challenging. And we do keep it more school-based at ours, although this year, thanks to the symphony questions, that's made it much easier. So we're probably the opposite of Charis. Probably once a half term it's world based, you know, what's going on in the world, and then the others are more school based with what they want to change in school. The questions don't come from me unless I'm desperate, and no one's come up with one. So we have question finders on our comms team whose job it is to go around on a weekly basis and make a nuisance of themselves to all teachers and all pupils. So they carry around their notepad that says question finders on it, because that's very important to them. Asking children, SLT, members of staff, you know, the midday assistants, anyone who they can get hold of, for questions that we can use. And they're really good at it. They don't give up. They go round, and if a teacher says to them, I'll have a think and I'll come back to you, they will come back to them. So they know that they can't sort of get away with fobbing them off, because they get written on the list and they come back and say, Miss, you did say you'd come up with one for me today.
Nice.
And with our questions, what we said is to make it worthwhile, that whatever question the children asked, so whatever it was, so for example, I'm trying to think of one. So we asked them what they wanted to use the quad for in the school. This was last year. It's a piece of grassland that sits in the middle of our school. you know, old-fashioned Victorian school that's set on a quad. So we've got that grassland in the middle that no one uses, and if the doors aren't unlocked, you can't even get into it. They wanted to use it for packed lunches. They had lots of options, reading areas, etc., etc. So teachers agreed to go on a lunchtime rota out there, and we implemented that within a half term. So we always say to the children, whatever you vote for, whatever you have as a school have voted for, we will implement that or make that change or put that in place within a half term. So another question we do every half term, they get asked what they want one of the assemblies to be about. So when it was the Australian fires, it was like that, or Brexit, and they vote what they want the assembly to be on, and within that half term they will get an assembly on that. So I think the key for us was making it things we could change. You know, there's no point in them voting on something that you can't actually do, because what's the point? Something that was manageable for us. So some questions I do have to say, or, you know, go back to the teacher and tell them, you know, the PE teacher wants AstroTurf, you know, please tell them we can't do that, sort of thing. Don't get children voting on that because we'll never get it.
Yeah.
So making sure that it sort of can have an impact. The other issue for us at the beginning was making sure every teacher did it.
I was going to come on to that, but yeah, go on.
Sorry, yeah. So, you know, teachers who are perhaps less confident on the computer, you know, teachers who tell me they don't get the email every week, even though I know it goes to all staff and nothing else back to me, but somehow the emails got lost, never gets to them. But we do have children on the comms team called what are they called? Teacher liaison. Yes, that's the one. And he's very good, actually. He did the job in year 5 and he's now doing it again in year 6. He's brilliant. And he goes round to them and says, you know, if you need any help and you can't do it, I'll happily come and do it for you in your meeting. So he goes and offers help and, you know, make sure that they do it. And he'll knock on the door on a Friday and say, have you done your meeting yet? So he sort of goes round and reminds them. Nice. We still have the odd teacher who doesn't do it every week, but I meet with them on a Tuesday. The meeting gets emailed to the teacher on a Tuesday night when I get home from school, and the teachers have until Friday to get the meeting done. Because of how we work with children in different sets, it was quite hard. We don't sort of have a tutor time necessarily when they can do it, so we had to give the teachers a bit of leeway in the week of when they could do it. Although the classes do like to be first because they get told that they're first.
Yeah.
No one wants to be 18th. To do it, so they quite like that competition as well. So I think we've sort of cracked it more this year. It's such a shame we're not there, but with the questions and having the symphony questions, that's been quite nice and quite surprising. You know, some of the children's views that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to have on world issues, like Charis said, that they don't necessarily talk about at home with their parents or have the opportunity, but now they might go home and talk to their parents about it, which has been a real sort of positive for our school.
Nice, thanks, Lorrie. So I guess I've got 2 follow-up questions, and then we'll take the next subject. My follow-up question is, well, there's one actually from Kerry, which I think I'm going to ask you to answer, Charis, if that's okay. So Kerry's asked, are the results of your current affairs questions shared with all pupils, and if so, how? So there's a practical element that says that, you know, when you're using the class making tool, it starts by sharing the question we asked last time, doesn't it? And then you have the results so that everybody knows what the opinion was. But I guess in King's Lynn, like when you asked your question about Brexit or Boris Johnson or whatever it is, and you know what the result is, like, what do you do with that information? How, like, is it useful to you guys?
Yes, it depends obviously on the question. You know, like you say, it's shared every week. They usually have comment on the result. Sometimes it's surprising. I know as teachers sometimes we make assumptions of what the result might be, and it's not always the case. And the kids often comment on how it's come out. One thing I've learned is I try not to put I don't know or something too on the fence as an option, because I was finding that it was too easy to compromise, if you like, in inverted commas, with their group on that. So I've kind of deliberately done that, and that's actually given us some really interesting results because they have to come up with an answer, even if it's slightly one way or slightly the other way. to some degree. It's probably something we need to do a bit more, linking with maybe the PHSE a bit more, but it has been things like I've sent on to teachers, isn't this really interesting? Can you please have a conversation about this week in form time if you get an opportunity, because actually they've shown that, or that there's maybe a gap in their knowledge or whatever it is, depending on obviously what the question is, because they are quite, if you ever see the symphony questions, they're kind of like that, so they can be quite broad. So
yeah. So and Charis, do you have like teachers that are repeat offenders for not doing the tutor time stuff, like, and how do you approach that?
I moan if I'm honest. It's much better than it was. I think you have to, with any of these parts of you have to be quite persistent, whether it's us or the children, and make it really clear that it's just part of what we do. And there are some teachers that are reluctant or forget or claim they don't have the email, like Lorrie said. But you just have to keep saying, well, hang on a minute, I noticed you didn't do your meeting this week, is everything okay? Or I've noticed actually over the last 3 weeks you haven't done any of them. Is there a problem? Can I help? Can one of my student commissioners come and help? Can one of the communication team come and help? I'm quite belligerent. I'll keep moaning, and eventually but now to be fair, it's part of the fabric, if you like, of the school. So it's rarer now than it was.
Great, thank you. So I want to move on to talk about action teams, and again, I'm conscious of time, but I just want to ask a question to everybody on the CPD. Like, and I guess it's a bit inspired by what Laurie's been saying about the question finder's role on the communications team. Like, from your experience of running smart school councils, even if you just started or you've been doing it for a while, like, what's your best source of question ideas? Because I think from Greg and I's perspective, one of the most fundamental parts of getting this intervention right is asking good questions that are engaging, that people care about. So I thought it would be good just to ask you guys to comment with, like, where are the best sources for finding questions that you found so far? Hopefully the symphony questions help with that. But comment with some of your answers, and I'll try and share them at the end. So I think it would be good if we have this collective knowledge base of where we go for questions. And Lorrie, just on that, before we move on to action teams, like, when you're question finders going out to do their job, who's the most fruitful person for them to talk to? Who gives you the most ideas in your school? Have you got somebody in mind?
One of our senior management team that deals with sort of child protection and pastoral stuff, she's brilliant for questions, you know, I think, because she's very much in touch with you know, what the children want and what children are saying, because she's sort of not class based, so she probably has more time sort of for talking to the children. So we've had a lot of questions sort of this year about, rather than playground equipment and, you know, how do you want, you know, your playground to look better, which often has been a school council thing that we've always done, raising money for equipment for the school historically, you know, more about the feel of the school and, you know, how they want to be, I can't think how to word it well, but sort of treated in class, and how they want to feel, you know, in their learning, what they want to learn in terms of the creative curriculum. I don't think we call it that anymore, do we? Whatever it's called now, it's going back to subjects. But so it's been more based on the children's learning experience, not always necessarily what they're learning, but perhaps how they're learning it. So we talk to them about sort of art, DT, science, all of those more that can be more practical, and the feedback, the vote very much was that, you know, they wanted it to be more practical and less spoken about in it. So that's something we've tried to implement in our curriculum.
Nice, that's a hot tip there. So get your question finder to go and speak to somebody with pastoral responsibilities. I like that, because I think that that's a good link there. Okay, cool. Right, well, action teams then. So what I think would be good to do is, okay, if we share some of the questions to our panel, if that's all right. And I want to start with the question about sort of how you set up by coming to you, Charis, because you said you had an interesting link with your comms team, your student commissioners and action teams. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's something that we need to set up kind of more explicitly as an action team. Student commission exists, and most of the work that student voice has across the school comes through them. So there are some things that existed before Smart School Council, but makes sense for it to be linked, and there are some things that have come since. So for example, our students do learning walks, and they go and assess the learning and atmosphere in lessons. That's something they've always done, but it's something that we can link to questions. And the student commissioners do that, so that can tie in really nicely. We've got a group of, well, currently year 9, but there will be year 10 when we come back, who are working on some charity work for the elderly, and they're just running with it. I mean, they sit in my office at lunchtime, but I have literally done nothing. If I turn my laptop briefly.
Oh, nice. That looks organised.
They've got 4 plans of what they might do to raise money, and they've come and presented to senior management and things like that. So our student commission, we haven't particularly separated it into the action teams in the traditional way. It's something I want to do. Luckily I've got a colleague joining me on the student voice, so it's not just me next year, because I'm also have other hats in the school. So it's something that I'm hoping we can build up, because we're going to have we're going to divide them into 2, which will then be subdivided. We're going to divide them into an academic team and a pastoral team. So then there'll be maybe a team within the pastoral team that looks at bullying and kind of LGBT issues, that sort of thing. And then the academic team will carry on some of what they already do, but they're also going to come to staff meetings and put across students' thoughts on what the curriculum looks like. So obviously that's all changing and developing as we speak. So it's something that we maybe need to be more explicit in what we call it. It exists, but it's something we want to develop. But yeah, I think just not being afraid. I know I'm kind of jumping the gun because I'm talking about a top tip, but in terms of action teams, is don't be afraid of pushing it. You know, when I first started and said, by the way, guys, students are going to come and do learning walks, you should have seen some of the teachers' faces. However, now it's seen as one of the most useful tools in the school, both for an individual teacher and kind of as just a picture of what's going on generally. So just, you know, go for it. Don't be afraid by a suggestion a student makes, or even a member of staff makes, of something that your teams can go and do, because they can be absolutely amazing. They can really surprise you.
Thanks, Charis. I think that's a really good point as well that you opened with there, about this idea that, you know, sometimes when we talk about action teams, I think it can come across as quite big picture, and it looks difficult to understand what it looks like in practical, in its like practical application. But if you step back and think, well, actually, your schools are already doing so many of these things, and it's about looking at what you're already doing to start off with, to see how that can link into your Smart School Council and possibly have a little bit of a rebranding in terms of calling it an action team, and then working how those 2 things can work together towards that sort of pupil voice aim. That's great, thanks. So then, Lorrie, I thought I'd ask you just to, if you can, in a short way, because I'm conscious of time and I can't take up too much of people's time. Like you found action team difficult in the past, haven't you? And I think that's a common experience for some of our teachers. So would you mind just sharing with us, what your current thoughts are on action teams and what your plan is maybe for next academic year?
Oh, I've lost my screen. Can anyone see me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Lorrie, so just go with your voice for now. It's a very useful one.
Oh, there we go. I don't know what happened there.
Don't worry.
Yeah, for me, or for us as a school, action teams were the sort of hardest part to get our head round. I couldn't quite comprehend how it was going to work and what it actually was. We did do the rebranding that you'd sort of suggested when we went on the training. So lots of our playground squad became an action team. So we sort of incorporated them into it. So things that were already up and running. But the hardest thing for us was we wanted to hand it over to the children. So we wanted the action teams to be coming from the children, not from the adults. But they need an adult sponsor, their primary school children. So they can't just go and run an action team on their own. They've got all these brilliant ideas. We're quite harsh as a school as to whether an action team can start. So they have to fill out a form to say what their idea is. They have to get an adult sponsor from around the school, which isn't me. I don't sponsor any action teams because I help with the communication team. So I sort of pass that on to other teachers in the school, which has also been a struggle because everyone's very busy. Everyone's got lots of jobs and doesn't necessarily want to sponsor an action team. That's got a lot better this year. In terms of adults, what we try to do is encourage children to go to the teacher who's responsible for that subject or that part of school to sponsor them. So we had a writing team who wanted to start up, they wanted to run a lunchtime club. And so we sent them off to the teachers who, you know, do the literacy in the school, because we knew that they'd be interested in getting that started. We've actually had some teacher action teams this year. We've got a Keep Fit teacher class this year that now runs after school. So that's an action team. So that's been great. Nice. We've had a teacher bake-off that the children ran, and then they sold the cakes that the teacher had baked off. Teachers had baked after school. I've never won it. I'm not bitter, but I've never won it. Even though I run the whole thing. Never won. Yeah, we've had basketball clubs. So they go in the way of, you know, the sports coaches that we have in school, but they're run by the children. They then announce them in assembly with the assembly coordinators. We probably only have, the most action teams we've ever had at once is probably about 20. But that's a lot better than it was in the first year when it was only sort of 5, and it was really hard because everyone just wanted to raise money for charity. Where I work in Barking and Dagenham, you know, our parents don't, you know, have the money to be giving money to charity all the time. So we've really had to limit that to sort of 1.5 term or 1 every term. We also had issues with our PTA, who felt that we were stepping on their toes and doing things that they perhaps had planned to do. So now the PTA is one of our action teams. That's been a really positive thing over the last 12 months. So they now, one of their members comes to every Tuesday meeting we have. So we make sure that no events clash and that they're not raising money at the same time as another action team. And they've actually taken quite a workload off of me as well. They're really good. If an action team's running and they need a bit of extra adult support, they're always willing to come in at a lunchtime or after school and help, you know, sell the cakes or whatever. So that's been a real positive and great for sort of wider community for our school, because parents, our PTA is not big, but it's big enough, you know, for them to be a help to us. So that's been really good.
Yeah, I like that PTA sort of link. I'm not sure I've come across that in many other examples, but I think it's a really strong one, particularly when it comes to this sort of more collective approach to what you're all doing. Thanks, Lorrie. I know action teams can be difficult to talk about. I think the thing I'd like to add into what we've said, particularly for our new members who are with us today, is that it's a gradual process. Would you agree, Charis and Lorrie? Like, we're not trying to get all 3 of these elements set up immediately in the first term when you start. It's about sort of focusing on your comms team and focusing on the class meetings, and as you get used to those and if habits are formed, you can then start to manage and celebrate the successes of 1 or 2 action teams and then build it on from there. Does that resonate with you two?
Definitely.
Okay, cool. All right, guys, so we're nearly there, folks. We've got a couple of things to finish off. I'm really excited for this bit because I want to know what you're going to say. So, Charis, I'm going to you first. What's your one top tip for running a smart school council?
Can I have 2?
No.
Okay, my one top tip is probably don't be shy. When I first started this, it seemed like it was never going to happen. My student commission was 8 children. We're now at 100 and something. Teachers were reluctant. You know, it didn't feel like the greatest of starts, but if you're determined and you've got senior management on side, just keep going. It will grow, because students, like I say, they'll begin to see it as part of their entitlement of what is part of their school. So I'll just say, don't be shy, go for it, get your senior management on the board.
And if I was to give you a second one, because I'm feeling generous, what would it be?
Don't have I don't know as an option in a question.
Yeah, that's something that Greg and I have learned, right, Greg? Is about in the symphony questions that we send out, is that if you put an option in that says I don't know, then people will just pick that, and it's a way of opting out of the debate, which is really bad. So yeah, good point. Lorrie, what's your top tip?
Totally agree with getting senior management on board. I think without that, teachers won't necessarily feel that they need to do it, or that won't be the pressure to do it. But my main top tip as the teacher who and I have to avoid saying runs it because the children get really annoyed with me because I don't run it, they do. But
No,
as
quite
the
right.
teacher who supports on the Smart School Council, don't make yourself too available to them. As a primary school teacher, I don't know about secondary school, it's really tempting to do more than you should do or talk more than you should talk. So it's sort of learning as the teacher to facilitate rather than take over. Let the children do it and they will surprise you, because they just run it at this point of the year. By sort of October, November, they are running it and they don't really need me anymore. And that, for their own personal development, is just the best thing to see. Just one more thing though, can I say just one more thing?
Oh, classic teachers.
What I wanted to say about action teams and class meetings is that is how you get every voice involved, because the comms team are their little group. I think I've got 21, could be, I don't know, on my comms team, but the action teams are, you know, across the school from the youngest. If you can get them involved, that can be quite challenging, to the, you know, the top of the school. And the class meetings, a different child runs it every week and does the typing every week. So everyone in the school, if you asked, I genuinely think if you asked any child in my school, you know, what the Smart School Council is, they would know, because they are part of it.
Yeah. And Lorrie, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what matters to us most as a charity, is that people, that every young person, irrespective of where they come from or what abilities they do or don't have, whatever the case might be, that they have their voice and it's heard, and that they know that they belong in that community. And yeah, you're right, it's the action teams and the class meetings that allow for that sense of belonging to come through. Fantastic. Well, what I'm going to do is ask Charis and Lorrie to write down their top tips as well, if that's okay with you guys. I've not pre-warned you on this, because I think it would be good if we can share these in like little infographics in our Facebook group and other places as well. So I know we've been a bit quiet on the comments, and that's okay because we've got a lot of content we've gone through. But if you do have any questions, please do put them in the comments, because Greg and I can see what the comments are, we can make a note of them, and then we can move this discussion onto our Facebook group where we can carry on having the dialogue. And I presume, without, I'm not putting you on too much on the spot, but Charis and Lorrie, you're quite happy to carry on the conversation in Facebook. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. If you said no, I would have been screwed, so you didn't, so I'm glad about that. So that's nearly it from everybody. We'll keep an eye out for any questions that come through. Greg, do you want to just talk about the other CPD coming up? I put you on the spot there.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. So obviously today we've heard from like two amazing examples of Smart School Councils. And I think, but it's also important to remember that for some of our kind of newer members, we don't want it to appear daunting. And so what we've tried to do over the course of the rest of the term is put on some free CPD sessions that are a bit like this, well, exactly like this, but just different topics. So the next one's just about getting to know your class meeting tool. If anybody needs a hand with that, it's a bit more of like a drop-in session. If you want a hand, then drop in, you can book on that. And then the other one there is about persuading adults. So that's actually something that Charis kind of suggested that I thought might suit some of the newer schools. So like, how do you get this across to SLT, and how do you kind of persuade them that it's really important? Now, to some extent, they've probably done that already if you've joined the program, but it's about helping them to really understand. And then we've got a popular one at the end, just before summer, which is about kind of the quietest voices and how we can encourage them to get involved. So lots more CPD coming. This is the first try at doing this, so I hope that it's been valuable. And as thank you to Charis and Lorrie for their time in kind of sharing their story. But yeah, that's the other one that's other ones that are coming up, and I'll stick a link to the booking form if you'd like to come along to any of those.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Just for me then, guys, to say that, yeah, thank you for coming along. We really appreciate you spending some of your really valuable time in hearing from our fantastic guests. This is new, and we're not used to running sort of things online, and you don't get Greg and I's comedy duo act as much on Zoom, I'm afraid. But if you've got any comments about us to change of format or anything that you think we could be doing better for the rest of the CPD series, please drop us an email. We'd love to hear from you. So unless there are any comments that anybody wants to ask, we will call it a day. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you to Lorrie, thank you to Charis, and to everybody there for joining. It was an absolute pleasure, and hopefully see you all again soon.